Welcome to a conversation about unconscious bias. My name is Dave Denhan, and I work as a ministry consultant with the Christian Reformed Church. In my work, I come alongside of churches and pastors all the time in times of growth and transition and challenge. And sometimes those times are when staff people leave and positions need to be filled. I'm working today with Michelle DeBee.
Hi, my name is Michelle DeBee. I was the Director of Human Resources for the denomination for 14 years until my retirement in 2021. I was able to offer this training for a number of years for our denominational staff, and I'm very pleased now to be working with Dave to offer this for our churches. And again, I'm pleased to be here and look forward to speaking with you throughout this presentation.
This video comes out of a training on unconscious bias that our denomination's Human Resources Office provides to people who serve on hiring teams. It's even required if you've been on a hiring team already and have been through the training before. Why is that? Because our unconscious biases are so easy to lose track of, and that can be a real challenge during a hiring process. With this video, we want to equip you as a search team to be aware of your unconscious biases as you work together to fill an open position at your church. And maybe the first question to think about is this simple one. What is a bias? A bias is a preference for a particular thing or idea over other things or ideas. It's like a weight in my mind that tips the balance in my mind towards a certain direction. For example, I have a bias towards sunny days rather than cloudy days. Or I have a bias towards turtle Sundays rather than strawberry Sundays. Now, an unconscious bias is when I'm using a particular bias without even knowing it. When I'm unaware that my decisions, my conversations, my discussions are being affected by my preferences. So, for example, sometimes I'm biased towards certain articles, news stories, and conversations that confirm my already held beliefs about something. And we call that a confirmation bias. Sometimes I'm biased towards certain people after learning just one key thing about them, something that I like. Maybe they think like I do on a particular issue, or they went to the same university that I did, or they are from the same province or state. I don't know anything else about that person, but my mind is bent towards giving them the benefit of the doubt and even some credit or respect in other areas of life. Sometimes biases, even unconscious ones, can be helpful, but sometimes they are unhelpful and even harmful. And we're going to talk today about one of those times that our unconscious biases can be unhelpful when interviewing candidates for a position or a job.
Dave just provided a great introduction to what bias is. And we want to talk about this unconscious bias, what we're not even aware of, and some of the shortcuts that we take because we're not even aware that we're being biased in some way. So, for example, I go to the grocery store, and let's say it's a Sunday morning, and I see a couple very nicely dressed, and I register in my mind, oh, they probably just came from church. I don't stop and think that or mention it, but it kind of flits across my subconscious. Or I see somebody another time pushing a full cart of groceries. And I think, oh, big family. Or maybe getting ready for a trip. But I have something that just registers across my subconscious. We do that all the time, happens every single day. So picture with me for a moment, you're walking down a really busy city street. There's cars going by, there's multiple storefronts, there's a lot of hustle and bustle. And I have you drive just maybe for a minute. And I ask you to stop. I say, tell me every single thing that you just saw. What cars? Color, make, license plate. What people did you see walking down the street? Male, female, what were they wearing? What color shoes did they have on? And those storefronts, what were the names of all of them? Were there signs in the window? Now you're going to be able to probably give me some information. You're going to say maybe there was a blue car ahead of you, or you remember a bus coming at you, that there was a group of kids walking on the sidewalk, but there is no way you are going to give me every minute detail. It's impossible, because we have 11 million bits of information coming at us at any given time. And think about your day. There's so many things you do just by reflex or from learned experience. So on that same busy street, if a car had cut you off, you probably would have slammed on the brakes, because you've done it before, you've learned, you have kind of a muscle memory. You didn't have to stop and consciously think, oh, car in front of me, I don't want to hit them, hit the brakes. You just do it. So that's just a small example of what is coming at us all the time. And there's no way we can consciously register everything or remember everything. And we don't even know what influence it had on us as we were proceeding. We all have unconscious bias, every single one of us. It's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, it just is. Slamming on your brakes to avoid hitting the car is a good unconscious bias or memory that you have, but not all of them are. So let's jump in. I'm going to ask you to do a little exercise with me. I'll ask you in a minute to close your eyes, and I'm going to describe 3 pictures, 3 scenarios. With your eyes closed, I want you to imagine you are in that scenario. Picture what is happening, what's going on, what the people are. So close your eyes and imagine that you have gone to another city to a big major conference. And the night before the conference, you're out for dinner with your colleagues. You're in a really fancy restaurant. While you're sitting there, you see the chef come out of the kitchen. And the chef walks around to various tables asking how their food is, and maybe stops at your table to say, how was your meal? Thanks for coming in. The second scene, you've walked out of the restaurant and you're standing on the street, maybe waiting for your ride or for a taxi. And this car drives up with darkened windows, and you hear the thump, thump, thump of the bass of a loud song or music, at least. All you can hear is that thumping. The car parks, the door opens, and the driver comes out. And the third scene that I want you to picture is the next morning. You're at the conference in this big hall, and the CEO of the conference sponsor comes out onto stage. Now open your eyes. So the picture in the restaurant of the chef coming out of the kitchen, did you picture a young Black man? Or what about that car that drove up with the loud music and the driver came out? Did you picture a 50-ish-year-old white woman? And that last one with the CEO coming on stage, was he or she that you pictured in a wheelchair?
Well, those are not the scenes that I pictured based upon your initial descriptions, Michelle.
And Dave, that's likely because our brains are fans of the familiar. What we've seen or experienced in the past, we portray or project that would be happening in the future. So when we heard those scenarios, we pictured something likely we have seen before that we are familiar with.
Thanks, Michelle. So let's have you pause the presentation for a moment and discuss some of the things that you've heard. Here are some things to think about. Feel free to continue the video after your discussion. Describe the person or persons that you pictured in each of Michelle's 3 scenarios. The chef in the fancy restaurant, the driver of the car with the loud stereo, and the CEO from your company's competition. How similar or different were your pictures, the pictures in your mind, from the visualizations that Michelle offered. Discuss Michelle's comment that our brains are fans of the familiar. Do you agree or do you disagree? And talk about what value this conversation brings to your team and its work. Feel free to pause the video now for your conversation.
Welcome back. Now I want to offer something else for you to look at. Please take a look at a picture that is on the slide. What's the first thing you notice about this person? Most of you, like myself, notice the wheelchair. What might your thoughts be about this woman and what she does? Would you have guessed that she's a runway model? Or that she has her doctorate? Or that she's a sex therapist for the disabled community? Most of us, again, myself included, see somebody in this wheelchair and assume the largest part of her story is about her disability. Our first impressions don't always allow us to think beyond those first impressions.
Michelle, when I first heard you talk about this during your presentations to staff members at the denominational building, I was not expecting what you shared about this person. It forced me to rethink my first impressions. It forced me to realize that my first impressions are not as reliable as I thought they were. But here's what I wondered after that. We were trained to think about the first impressions that we make on others. So, what's wrong with thinking about first impressions?
How important are those first impressions? As interviewees, the person coming to be interviewed, we're taught first impressions are so important. You wear nice clothes, you give a firm handshake if it's in person, you smile, you want to be engaging. But what if those first impressions that the interview team has aren't correct? What if the candidate rehearsed all of their opening lines, rehearsed how they were going to present themselves, they practiced so that they could be good at it? Or what if just before the interview something happened that really rattled them, and so they're kind of off their game? They're not at their best because something significant happened on the way in. Maybe they witnessed an accident and had to stop and help, had a flat tire, whatever. So they've come in kind of, they were so sure they were going to have it nailed, but now they're kind of rattled. Or maybe they're extremely nervous because they really, really, really want this job. And so they're not really being themselves. We don't know what those are as the interview team. On the other hand, they might just be really gifted at winning others over, the gift of woo. So you're pulled in, you're drawn to them. But we, again, don't know what that's all about. So I was doing this specific training with a group of ministry leaders, and one of the leaders said, "That's me. I make a horrible first impression in interviews. They're not natural. It's not how I'm uncomfortable. And I know I don't come across well." And yet this person I know is a very talented, qualified ministry leader. But they said, that's not my gift in interviews. It's not normal for me. So my encouragement to you is be aware. That's what we're talking about a lot today, raising our awareness level. Be aware if you're feeling instantly drawn to a candidate, kind of leaning in, or if something is kind of like, that's we're not off to a good foot, and you almost physically even lean back. Be aware of yourself. Do they remind you of somebody that you know who you like or don't like? What is it that is pulling you in? Because often how we start that interview can influence how we feel throughout the interview. We feel good about the person initially, all their answers kind of have a positive taint. or conversely, not such a good taint. So just be aware of yourself and what might be leaning into or out of that candidate.
In a moment, we're going to have you hit the pause button again. And I'd ask you to have a conversation focusing on these questions. What was your first thought when you saw the picture of the woman in the wheelchair? Share the ideas, the preconceived ideas you might have had about this woman and how those thoughts might impact the interview process. Share a time that you may have made a poor first impression, or share an experience where your first impression of someone else didn't end up being very valid. Please pause now for your conversation.
Welcome back. I now want to share something interesting with you about names. A lot of different scientific studies have looked at name recognition or names related to different ethnicities or gender that are on resumes. So studies have done some blind studies, scientific studies with groups. One particular one took 3,000 resumes. 1,000 of those had African sounding names, African American sounding names. 1,000 that were identical to this first 1,000 had Asian sounding names. And the third group of 1,000 resumes were more Caucasian sounding names. So names like Emily, Greg, Brendan, versus the African sounding names of Lakeisha or Rashid, or Asian sounding names. So they took, again, the resumes were identical. Studies showed that over 2-to-1 trained HR people selected those with Caucasian sounding names. Similar studies showed that males were selected more than women with, again, identical resumes. Our brains follow an unintentional path. We see what we recognize, maybe what we can say easily or read easily, and unconsciously we separate. We aren't doing this intentionally. We're not going, oh, yes, I know that name, Greg or Brendan or Emily. Those are familiar names. We don't do that. We aren't even aware of it. So though we can think we are being 100% not biased, of course not. We're looking just at what the skills are and what their experience. Yet studies show we are being influenced. Myself, I would think, no, come on, I've done this for years. I don't let that impact me. Until I heard stories from our denominational staff, and not just one or two, but several. One in particular, when he was shortly out of college, applied for a number of positions, has an Asian name, wasn't getting many call-ins for interviews. And one of his friends suggested he change his name to more Anglo-Caucasian sounding name. And he did. Same resume. Nothing changed. He just put a fictitious name on top, and he got called in for several interviews. I was like, this is a person I know in our church, in our denomination, who has experienced this. It's not something just out there, or it's not something I can consciously say, I won't do. It influences all of us. So again, an awareness building that we're not naive to say that does have an impact on us.
You're right. It is subtle. And maybe that's why we do the training at the denominational building so often. Unconscious biases are such that they are easy to miss. And so we need regular reminders of these mental shortcuts so that when we're in an interview situation, we're aware of how they might impact our decisions.
So one more topic that I have called affinity bias. When we meet someone for the first time, we naturally start up a conversation and we try to find something we have in common. Oh, you like to travel, so do I. A certain sports team, hobbies, places we've visited, where we're from. who we know in common. Very, very typical. It's what we do. So why would I bring this up about interviewing? Well, because my unconscious bias, again, can kick in. I might see a name that's familiar to me. Oh, I know other people with that last name. Or I see they're from my hometown. Oh, wow. I bet we know some of the same people, or we have some things in common. We could talk about places we've been that are similar. University or college. Oh, we went to the same one. Wow. We're naturally inclined to start talking about those things. And yet that has nothing to do with their skills for the position you're interviewing them for, who they know, who we know in common. So again, our unconscious bias might kick in. So for denominational positions, about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we brought in a new software product that actually removes names, addresses, and university or college name to try to help those who were deciding who would come in for an interview to not be unconsciously biased by a name, male, female, familiar, not familiar, ethnic sounding name, etc. So at first blush, all we're looking at is experience, what their degree is, where they've worked. Now, some of those can still bias us too, but it's less likely. Once we select who we want to come in, then those names and colleges and that information gets revealed. So we've been trying, they call it a blind review or anonymous review of those applications. Another place that affinity bias can creep in is at the start of the interview, the small talk. Hey, I see you're from ABC town. That's where I grew up. Do you know so-and-so? Or what school did you go to? And we're just kind of easing into the conversation and we're helping them relax is what we think. Or we may say, oh, I see you worked at First Church in ABC town. My parents used to go there. Do you know? And again, we're just kind of small talk. We're making connections. We're helping ease in. We're helping them kind of settle in. But it provides an uneven playing field if I don't do that with every candidate in the same way. So I chit chat and have small talk about commonalities with one. Then we ease into the questions. The next candidate, I don't see anything that I can kind of connect to. So great, you're here, wonderful. Let's get going. The first candidate, kind of relaxed. Hey, these people know me a little bit. Hey, I think this is helpful. But I've created an uneven playing field because you don't and won't have an identical connection with each one. So what might be good in a social situation may not be appropriate in an interview. So what do? That's kind of natural to have small talk, like I said, when you meet somebody for the first time. So one possibility, start the interview by saying, welcoming them, making sure they have a glass of water or that the screen sound is working. But then take the focus onto the interview team. We're going to each introduce ourselves. We're going to tell you who we are. So let me start. I'm Michelle DeBee, and you give a little ditty about who you are. And the next person does, and the next person. And then maybe you describe the format that you have laid out for the interview. We have a number of questions we're going to ask. 3 of us are going to take turns asking those questions. We're asking the same questions of every candidate. And then at the end, we'll give you a chance to ask questions because we assume you want to know some things more about this position as well. The biggest thing, whether you do it that way or a different way, to be consistent, to have the same intro or small talk with every candidate. Don't delve into who you know, what you have in common, and create, again, differences for that impact. Those discussions or conversations might be fine, but have them later, after the interview, after the person is hired. Because who they know, where they went to school, where they grew up, really doesn't have to do with the position that you have in front of you.
So very helpful. All right, well, let's turn the page a little bit here, and let's think about some specific things that people can do to reduce the impact of their unconscious biases.
So start with your job description before you even post or announce an opening that you have. Look at what you've listed as qualifications. If you are looking, let's say, for a senior leader in your ministry or church, and you put down that the person that you most desire, or the requirement for experience, is that they have been a senior leader in a church for at least 10 years. Well, might not get many candidates under the age of 40, because by the time you get some experience and then you get to a senior position, you're going to be close to 40 or older. Think about that. Is that an absolute base requirement for your position? What if you indicated significant experience as a leader? Because it might be somebody who had been a leader in a business setting for a number of years and just more recently moved into ministry. So they don't have senior leader in a church, but they have significant leadership experience. So look and review that wording. How is an applicant seeing and reading that? Take out things that are not absolutely necessary. We often put in higher degrees than that we might like, but may not be absolutely necessary for the position. Review the resumes and cover letters without identifying information if you can. If you're in a ministry or a church, maybe an administrative support staff can take all of them and just blank them out before the team reviews them for the first time. Try it, find out. Sometimes we select candidates that fit our criteria, but then there might be one in that group doesn't quite meet what we're expecting, but somebody important recommended them and said they'd be great. Or somebody on your interview team says, I know them and I know they don't quite meet our criteria, but I really think we should interview them. Resist that temptation. You listed specific criteria on your resume. Let's say it was 10 years or significant experience in a leadership position, and somebody who was referred to you by an important person or somebody you know really only has just become a leader, but they are dynamite. You are tempted to call them in, bypass your criteria. But you didn't do that with every candidate, only the one you already had some additional information about. And what if there were a lot of those types of candidates who didn't even apply because they believed you when you said you had to have significant leadership experience? And then in the same way that I said, have the same opening, create a structured interview process. Write out the questions you're going to ask. Ask those questions of every candidate, whether you know them already or not. Give them the same opportunity. Don't presume you know the answers for somebody who is a known candidate. Ask the same questions in the same way. Give them, again, an equal playing field. And finally, have a grid or a rubric that you can use to evaluate each candidate. Now, you likely are going to put this together before you even start. Things like significant leadership experience, communication style, interpersonal skills, experience working with a team, self-starter. You're going to have whatever those criteria are. But if you finish the interview and everybody on the interview team first takes a moment to rate in each of those categories what they heard, what they witnessed, what they believed to be true, and then compare those ratings, share them with each other, and then start the discussion. Everybody on your interview team is there for a reason. If you create a criteria or a rubric and evaluate those and then share them, you have a chance to hear the different voices on your team and possibly eliminate some of the bias. Whatever you do, take your time. There's no prize for doing an interview process quickly and cutting and taking shortcuts. So slow down, take your time. You want the best candidate. And even in those criteria that you've evaluated in that discussion, be honest with each other. If you think maybe you were biased because you knew this candidate, or maybe you were a little skewed in your thinking because you did find out they were from your hometown and they know a bunch of the same people and you got a good recommendation. Be aware, keep those in the forefront.
Lots of great structure and process here, and more than a few things to think about together. So how about you hit the pause button again, just to discuss what you've heard and imagine what it might look like in your setting. Please go ahead, pause the presentation for that conversation. And we're back. What have we heard today? Well, today we've talked about a number of important things. We've talked about bias in general and unconscious bias specifically. We've talked about first impressions and how misleading and unfair those first impressions can be. And we've talked about mistakes that we sometimes make when reviewing other people's resumes. And we've talked about some specific steps that you can take to reduce the impact of your unconscious biases. Now, again, our hope in all of this is to make you aware of the mental shortcuts, like first impressions, that end up being problematic in the interview process. And if you have any questions about this material or you'd like to explore further, please contact our denomination's Human Resources Office at CKOPPENAAL@crcna.org, or please connect Pastor Church Resources at pastorchurch@crcna.org. Thanks for watching, and God bless you.